Welcome back to 100 Plus, a look at the most significant people, events, and ideas in the history of the Christian faith. In today's podcast, Mike Woodruff takes a look at the 4th century scholar and church leader Jerome, who, although a bit odd and eccentric, helped the early church get an accurate copy of the Bible.
One of the most exciting things to me about framing a church history study around the 100 most important people, events, and ideas was a chance to hone in on the 100 most important people, events, and ideas. The study of history can be fun. Of course, it can be insufferably boring, but it can be fun. And if it's sort of thoughtfully done, and if we could sort of thoughtfully and sequentially focus on the big things, I thought that this would be helpful to people understanding what has gone on over the last 2,000 years. And I think that this is important because my take is that most Christians, and perhaps I'm focusing here on Western Christians and Protestant Christians at that, most people have almost no idea what happens between the Apostle Paul and Billy Graham. Might know a few things about the Reformation and have this sense that some bad things happened with the Crusades and Inquisition, and Middle Ages is just a big mess. But that's about it. So I thought, well, we'll water ski over a lot of things, but we'll take a little bit of a deeper dive around the things that really matter, and we'll do it in order, and that will help everybody sort of get some handles on things. Well, if you've been with us from the beginning, you know that the first mistake was that I made was trying to do these in 10 minutes. I just couldn't get it done. I was going to do them off the top of my head because, of course, most people know very little about church history. So I thought, well, I can just take these top 100 things and talk about them for 10 minutes very quickly. But I found that these big events are big events in part because of the context around them. And so I needed to give more attention to the moods and the movements that were going on. And that meant that they just took a lot more time than I thought. So the fact that they're longer forced me to do a little bit of work on this. And so I've been going back and reviewing old notes and lectures and skimming some of the new books that have come out. And as I've done that, I have been struck by a couple things. First, the church history that I studied 35 years ago was very Western. Now, I'm a fan of Western civilization, and I'm not sure we should give up the study of Western civilization for global civilization. When my oldest son went to college, he was in an honors program, and one of the first things that he did is he took a course on Chinese civilization. I thought, okay, great, except you don't know Western civilization. Why in the world are you studying Chinese civilization? I mean, it seems a little odd, but oh well. So I'm not down on the study of Western civilization. But there is a lot, as I have looked at some of these newer takes on things, there's a lot about African and Asian church history that I did not get when I did this 40 years ago. And it's helpful because some of the things happening there have shaped things. The second big aha I had was remembering how incredibly messy and iterative history is. Things do not line up in an orderly fashion, and that makes explaining them more complicated. And we have that coming into play today in this episode, number 12, because, I'm just trying to keep things in order. We started in the first century, a couple events, the burning of Rome, and then the destruction of Jerusalem, and then moved pretty quickly into the ante-Nicene period, which starts at the death of John the Apostle. I think last time I said John the Baptist. John the Apostle around 100 AD, and it goes up till the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. And this is where I talked about Justin and Polycarp and a few of the others. And then I did a few episodes on Nicaea itself, the Council of Nicaea, Constantine, and then some of the events around the Council of Nicaea. So the early formation of the New Testament canon, the Apostles' Creed, these things were not done then, but they sort of had their grounding, their beginning there. So we looked at that. And then we have moved more recently into the post-Nicene period, which I said is busy. Lots of players because there's this sort of explosion of writing and explosion of thinking. And so in podcast 10 and 11, I started to talk about all the doctors of the Roman Catholic Church come out of this time. We looked at Athanasius, who was the one that fought, for the council, or fought for the Nicene Creed to be embraced. And then last time we focused on Augustine, because he is the major player of the post-Nicene period, and arguably the major player after the formation of, after the events and the people of the New Testament. So I mentioned others, the Cappadocian Fathers, Chrysostom, and some others. But today we are going to focus on Eusebius Hieronymus Sophronis, who mercifully goes by the name of Jerome. And he's this 4th century monastic scholar who assembled the Latin Vulgate. So the challenge here is that in order to appreciate Jerome, you sort of have to understand a bit about monasticism. But monasticism doesn't show up in my list of 100 things for a while until we get to St. Benedict. And so I chased my tail on this for a little bit, and I finally decided, okay, we're going to take Jerome now, and then we're going to move on to the Fall of Rome and the Council of Chalcedon, and then St. Patrick, who's one of my favorite people to study. And then when we come to St. Benedict, we are going to look at the development of monasticism. So I'll say a little bit about it today, but not much. So, the Council of Nicaea happens in 325. The post-Nicean period starts right away, and it goes up until the fall of Rome, which happens when King Alaric, a Gothic king, Alaric, I think he's a Hun, he, in 410, he does something that no one had done in 800 years, and that is that he overcomes the wall around Imperial Rome, and he goes in and he sacks the city. And Rome, this holy city, this center of civilization, begins to fall. It's going to take a long time to fully fall. But with the barbarians overcoming the gates, you enter into the Dark Ages, or now that's not in favor. So now I think the politically correct term is the early Middle Ages. So the post-Nicene period goes from the end of the Council of Nicaea up until the fall of Rome. And we looked at Athanasius already. He was one who worked in this period, and Augustine, who comes later. 354 he's born, and then his whole, his adult life, he's going to be dealing with the fall and the collapse of Rome. He will die in 430, and the barbarians are in a sense marching into Hippo in Algeria, northern Africa at that point. So it's a long collapse in one sense. Between them comes Ambrose, and I mentioned Ambrose last time. I wish I had more time for Ambrose. He was the Bishop of Milan, modern day Italy. He was such a polished preacher, so eloquent that Augustine, when he's this new professor of rhetoric and gets the job in Milan, goes to hear Ambrose, and he's just wanting to study Ambrose's speaking style, but he hears the gospel. It's part of what wins him over. And Ambrose is worthy of study for other reasons. He has this sort of controversial coronation as the Bishop of Milan in 354. He wasn't a theologian. He wasn't really sort of on the track to become the bishop, but the people loved him so much that when the previous bishop died, they sort of force him. Initially he says no, but they force him to become the bishop. And so he then, as the bishop, he then decides to start to study theology. And he had been, I think, an attorney before then. So he studies theology, and then he becomes this prominent theologian, a very important writer. He's, alongside being a great preacher and a good thinker, he's a great administrator. He has a reputation for being good in worship, antiphonal worship, sort of monastic or Middle Ages worship is often credited to him. Probably that's not what happened, but he probably embraced it, and so it grows up under his reign. He has a reputation for being wise on issues of church and state. And he's wonderfully warm and generous. We're going to see him as the contrast to Jerome, who is, nobody likes Jerome. He's wonderfully warm and generous. He's winsome. And yet he is not willing to back down on a fight at all. So theological issues, he will not give an inch to the Arians. And he's also courageous. So Theodosius is the king at this time. And Theodosius is a Christian, and he's a friend of Ambrose's. And he gets mad at some point. There's a riot going on in this part of his empire. So he sends in the troops in Thessalonica, and they kill like 6,000 people. And Ambrose thinks this is an incredibly unjust, bad thing that he has done. And so when Theodosius, the king, comes for communion, he says, no, you can't have communion. You've got to repent. You've got to do penance in order to get back into the church. And this is not the kind of thing you said to a king. But Ambrose did, and to his credit, Theodosius repented publicly. There's other things that we could say about Ambrose, but again, he's probably most famous for being involved in seeing Augustine come to faith under his preaching and under just his friendship. But our focus is on Jerome. Again, the opposite of Ambrose, and the opposite really of Augustine. So Jerome was born in 347 to well-to-do Christian parents in Stridon, think modern-day Slovenia. If that doesn't mean anything to you, think of the Balkans. If that doesn't mean anything to you, think of the middle of Europe. So when he was 12, he goes to Rome to study rhetoric and philosophy. Near the end of this time, he has a conversion. He's baptized. And then he's going to spend the next 20 years traveling around, during which time he is going to be attracted to monasticism, which is very different than the monasticism that Luther is going to react so negatively to at the time of the Reformation. So early monasticism is really an effort to purify the church. It's an effort to reach a greater level of sanctification, not to earn salvation. It doesn't go down that path. And it's also just a way the early monks see themselves as working for the common good. So there's sort of two categories of monasticism. Some are hermits, and they seek to be left alone to pray. They're going to go into the desert. And those in this camp often want to double down on the things that they see in the Bible. So there's a sense in which all Christians are called to pray and to worship and to care for the poor. There's a sense that we're all called to this. But they also see that in the Bible, for instance, Samson takes this Nazirite vow that he's not going to cut his hair and he's not going to drink alcohol. And Jesus goes into the desert for 40 days of fasting and prayer. And so they're like, we're going to do everything we can to sort of double down on some of these things. And it's not going into the desert, not being a hermit to escape the corruption of the world. That's what I thought initially, but it's sort of the opposite. It's an understanding that the biggest problems are not the world. They're sort of in my own heart. I've got to wrestle with those. You go out into the desert to wrestle with the devil, to wrestle with your own lusts and other things. And so you've got that kind of monk. And then you've got, in addition to those who want to be left alone, you get those that get together. They're going to form a community, a monastic community. They're going to work together to try and help each other grow in Christ-likeness, to worship together, and to be an engine for the common good. So again, I'll talk a lot more about this later on, but Jerome has got some hermit in him, in part because nobody can get along with the guy. He is described as bitter, vain, vindictive, and inconsistent. And that's what his friends say. This is why Ambrose is so much his opposite. Everybody loves Ambrose, even those people that he's not giving an inch to in theological debates. Everybody likes Ambrose. So by the way, he's Augustine's opposite, because Augustine is going to spend his whole life, really sort of regretting that he doesn't get to have sex with his concubine. And Jerome is going to be upset most of his life that he's got too many books. He has this dream in which he feels convicted that he is being judged for being too much a disciple of Cicero, this philosopher and not enough of Jesus. And so he was a scholar of Cicero. He's got all these books, these classic books. Besides, he has to get rid of them. So he's not a happy guy. So initially he's gonna form a monastic band of people that are gonna try and get along, but no one can get along with him. And so this group disbands. So at this point, 374, he goes to Antioch, and when he gets there, he's sort of tired of travel. He's got some inner conflict, and so he does some writing for a bit. But then at 375, he gets sick. He almost dies, and this is when he has his famous dream that he's got too many books. And so he decides that he is going to take a 2-year stint as a hermit. But he goes into the Syrian desert, but he's not really prepared for it. He's not really cut out for it. The experience is not altogether successful. He comes back into broader civilization. And over the next few years, he's then going to be involved in some of the theological conflicts of the day. He's going to be ordained as a priest, and he is eventually going to end up he doesn't want to take on any priestly duties. He's going to end up as a scholar, and he ends up as the secretary for the Bishop of Rome, and he's going to write some theological treatises and other things. In 385, he is going to leave Rome, which he calls Babylon, and he is going to travel to the Holy Land. He'll do this with a number of people traveling with him, Paula and a number of women, sort of wealthy people that are supporting him in this. And he's going to go down to the Holy Land. He's going to set up, he's going to set up a monastic order and a cloister for the women. And he's going to spend, somewhat unsuccessfully, because this monastery won't necessarily work, but he's going to live there for the rest of his life. He'll die in 420. And so it's unlikely that we would be talking about Jerome as one of the 100 most significant people, except for the work he does when he's in Bethlehem. And I saw his study there on one of my trips. You can go into the room where he did a lot of his study for those last 30 years. And what he does is he translates the Bible he gives us the Latin Vulgate. So here's what you have to understand. The New Testament's written in Greek. The Hebrew Bible is written in Hebrew, yeah. The Old Testament is written in Hebrew. At the time, most people did not read Greek or Hebrew. Some of the people read Greek because Alexander the Great had conquered the world, but a lot of people didn't read Greek now. At this point, they're reading Latin. And so in the West, as Rome is gaining dominance, people are just reading Latin. So there is a Hebrew translation into the Greek called the Septuagint, sometimes abbreviated LXX, because there was this belief that 70, so it's Roman numeral 70 scholars had translated it, and they had this perfect translation. And so you've got the Greek Old and New Testament. And if you read Greek, that you were fine. You could read the Bible. But not many people could, and so and the Latin translations that are out there, there's all kinds of them, and they've got some controversies sometimes over translations, and so Jerome, this great scholar, is tasked by the church to do the translation into Latin, to give the church a great Latin translation. And so initially, 382 to 385, he works translating from Latin and Greek into Latin. And then he decides that what he really needs to do is he's got to study Hebrew in order to make a great translation, not out of translations, but he's going to go back to the more original texts. And he's going to work on this for the next 23 years until 404 when he's done. And by the way, it takes him this long because he's involved in writing all kinds of things. He's involved in every theological controversy that's going on at that time. And he will write, with the exception of Augustine, he will write more commentaries, he will write more treatises, he'll write more than anyone else, perhaps in the history of the church. And so he's doing a lot of other things, but he's going to give us this Latin Vulgate. So Vulgate is a Latin word, vulgus, and it means common. So he's, you can see the derivation of the word vulgar, common, the language that everybody can understand. He is going to give the church a translation that will last for the next 1,000 years. And it will become the translation. As a matter of fact, at the Council of Trent in the 16th century, the Roman Catholic Church will say that the Latin Vulgate is the sort of premier Latin translation, and it is the Bible that if you're Catholic that you want to use. Look, a few notes here. When he's done, he's got this very fine, accurate, well-written, thoughtful, accurate, carefully translated copy of the Bible in the language that people could read. And so it's a little tragic that over time a lot of errors, a lot of copy errors, because remember, you're just writing. It's just people writing. You can't go to, you can't just Xerox this stuff off. And so errors get introduced. And if I make a copying error and give you my copy, and then all the copies you make to hand out to your friends are going to have my copying errors plus any copying errors that you get. So you can imagine over 1,000 years, you just got lots of copying errors. Jerome's work is so revered that everybody just wants this, they want Jerome's Vulgate, but the problem is lots of errors are going to be introduced to this, but because it's so highly esteemed, no one's going to be, until the Reformation, sort of nobody's going back to the Greek and Hebrew that he was using to get the translation that he gave everybody else. So there's another irony here, and that is that, 1,000 years later, nobody speaks Latin. And so he translates it into Latin so that it's the language of the people, everybody can use it. And now most services that are in Latin, of course, nobody understands. So there are some ironies here. One final note to mention about Jerome is that when he was preparing the Bible, when he was looking at the Hebrew and Greek translations to copy into Latin, he realized that the intertestamental books, the apocryphal books, so these are the books that you have heard of that are in the Catholic Bible and not in the Protestant Bible, Judith and Maccabees and the Wisdom of Solomon and Ecclesiasticus and these books that are written between the end of the writing of the Old Testament, about 400 BC, and then the beginning of the New Testament. He sees that these books are not in the Hebrew Bible. And so he decides that they should not be in his Bible. That they are helpful, but that they are not on par with the Hebrew canon or the New Testament canon. So he wants to leave them out, but he is forced to leave them in, but he sort of makes it clear that he doesn't think they should be in. So 1,000 years after him, when the reformers get to translating, going back to the Greek and Hebrew, they're actually going to leave it out. So, given that the Latin Vulgate will be, it's going to shape the church for the next 1,000 years and be the official Roman Catholic Bible of today, and given that he did all this work by himself, you can see why he makes the list of the top 100. Not as important as Augustine, not as nice a guy as Ambrose, but very important. And so that is Jerome. The next episode we'll look at the fall of Rome. That will be episode number 13.